Hey, this is Pat Ricard, aka Project Pat, and you're listening to the Baltimore Beatdown Podcast, the best Ravens podcast on the planet.
It's pretty incredible. In fact, it's la-marvelous.
Thank you, guys.
All right, what is up, you guys? Welcome into the podcast. It is Jake here, coming to you on Thursday, February 20th. At least that's the date this is going to be releasing. We had a quick interview that we did earlier in the week with our buddy Connor Rogers from Bleacher Report. He's the host of the Stick to Football podcast and one of the great draft guys over there that they got at Bleacher Report. So he's going to be covering the Combine this coming week down in Indianapolis. And he's a guy who has a ton of insight on the draft at all times. But this is really when it starts to ramp up for him. So we wanted to get him on to talk a little bit of Combine, get you guys ready for it in the coming week. I think it starts this Sunday, the 22nd. So we have him on to give a little, insight on the event, just some general stuff, and then jump into some of the guys to look out for this year. So it's a really fun interview, about half an hour, just something quick we thought we'd throw out for you on a Thursday. So hope you enjoy it, and we will talk to you guys next week. And by the way, hope you're enjoying the new intro. Just threw that together. Let me know your thoughts. And like I said, talk to you guys soon. Enjoy the interview. All right, we now welcome on a very special guest, recurring guest, friend of the show. It's Connor Rogers from Bleacher Report and the Stick to Football podcast. Mr. Draft. So it's kind of your season. Connor, how's the start to draft season been going for you so far?
It's been great, guys. It's that time of the year. I mean, pretty much right after Christmas, it's nonstop. Once we get through the national title game, Senior Bowl. Obviously, we're diving right into the Combine now that Super Bowl is behind us as well. So it's exciting, and I'm glad it's here, and it's going to be pretty much nonstop until May right now.
Yeah, no doubt. We definitely appreciate your time in that respect because I'm sure you got a million things going on right now. But we did want to talk Combine. You mentioned it, so we figured we'd try to get you on here. Opening up this coming Sunday, the 22nd. I think we're going to be releasing this a little bit later in the week, so a couple days until it kicks off. But if you had to kind of use one word to describe what it's like to sort of cover the Combine from your vantage point, what do you think it would be?
I think it would be, interesting to say the least, because a lot of the interesting stuff to me is what you don't see on TV, and that's just a lot of the stuff at night. Now it'll be interesting this year because you have the drills will start in the evening, geared for prime time, and I wonder how that changes the scene in Indy. But just a lot of the discussions, a lot of the rumors you hear going on, and it's not always about the draft prospects, although you'll get a lot of buzz on how players interview and how their character grades out coming out of schools, and obviously which teams like who, and it depends, who trusts you and where you get your info from, of course, but more importantly from free agency and trades and roster cuts going into the NFL. So as much as the NFL offseason doesn't officially kick off for about a month from now, the Combine is basically the ultimate preview of it for anybody that's in the media or in the league as a whole. So I think it's an interesting, very interesting place because we all gather for the drills going on, but we're really there for a lot of other different reasons.
Absolutely. And that perfectly ties into our next question. What is one thing that people who follow the Combine from obviously a TV and social media perspective maybe don't understand about the Combine as a whole, and something that you could kind of shed some light on? Would it be that it's kind of, the unofficial winter meetings a la MLB, or is there something else?
I would say that's the secondary one. The primary one is the medicals, and that's something you don't see on TV. That's something that's not released to the public, and that's something that when news trickles out, it could sometimes be 100% true or 100% false. And once again, a lot of people just won't know that until they actually see the players on the field. The medicals at the Combine are vital because a lot of the players, I shouldn't say a lot, but a bigger number than you'd expect of the players that you're seeing hyped up on Twitter or wherever it may be might be completely off of team boards depending on what their doctors review. And that's stuff you really don't find out until about a year to 2 to 3 years later when that player, flunks out of the league because of medical reasons. Now, that's not a fun part of covering the sport. I like, to cheer for players to have a good career, and that's stuff you don't want to always hear, but it's something I always do say when that's a great question you guys just asked. And this is how I always answer it, because sometimes people will come at you and be like, why is this player 135th on your board when he's in the second round of every single mock draft I read? And it's like, well, there's usually a good reason for that. And I'm not that contrarian where I just view a guy a couple of rounds different from the consensus. I think that'd be a little ridiculous. I think it's because, different media analysts have different sources, and those sources have different doctors. You could have one doctor that passes a guy with a completely clean physical, and you could have another team doctor that takes that guy off your board, says you can't draft him because we'll never pass him here. And I think we've seen countless examples of that over the year. One that always jumps out to me personally is that I remember after the draft a couple of years ago, everybody was so concerned about Nick Chubb's knee. And I remember I had one really reliable source tell me that Nick Chubb's medicals were actually significantly better than his teammates and Sony Michel. And if you guys remember that year, Sony Michel went in the first round. So it's interesting what gets out and what doesn't. And it's something that, a lot of people need to keep in mind when players start to fall on draft day very unexpectedly.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I mean, you mentioned like social media and some of the contrarian stuff going on. And, it's kind of a cynical place sometimes, especially Twitter. And there's definitely a decent segment of people who cover the NFL on Twitter that are super cynical about the draft and like particularly the combine, with sort of one of their main claims being that none of it really matters ultimately. Like, do you see their argument there at all? And like, what would your rebuttal kind of be to those people as someone who makes a living covering all of it?
Yeah. I'm glad you brought those people up. And no, I don't see their argument at all, because it's absolutely insane. And I'm not one of those people that sits here and moves players 65 spots up and down a board for what they do on TV at the combine. Now, you could definitely move them 65 spots on a board if they have a completely, torn apart knee or whatever it may be, shoulder, whatever it may be. Now, the people that sit here and say the combine doesn't matter just aren't doing their homework for that reason, because one, the info you get from teams, if you are plugged in with teams, can literally change how you view much of a draft class at times. Not an entire class, but some key different components of it. And number two is, guys, if somebody offers you more data on anything in life, why would you not accept it? It's just more clues or pieces to this giant puzzle that is the NFL draft. And a lot of people, and I'm probably guilty of this myself, like to call it, lotto tickets, or it's a lotto and it's pure luck and all that stuff. And I agree. But when you sit down to play any kind of gambling, you always want to increase your odds. And the combine helps you increase your odds, because there's, certain percentiles and there's certain thresholds that, listen, if a wide receiver goes and runs a 4.7 and you absolutely loved that player in college, you could still love him in the draft, but you need to accept that you're going to bat for an outlier. You're going to bat for an Anquan Bolden, Jerry Rice kind of player. Those are two of the best players ever that ran 4.7 kind of 40s. And those are outliers. They exist. It happens. But the point is, you're going against the curve. And I think the combine does a really good job of not outlining who's the best player, but of outlining, who has a pretty high chance to fail just because of athletic limitations. So, like I said, I'm somebody that, as I do this more and more years, I like having more data personally. I think people that completely take a crap on analytics are very shallow. And I think the analytics crowd that completely takes a crap on the tape guys are very shallow. And it's no surprise the guys that are using both to their advantage to gain an edge, and the same could be said for teams across every single sport, not just football, are gaining an edge and are doing this probably the best of anyone.
Absolutely. They are complementary to each other. The tape, it's like religion and science in a way. And there's a different aspect of it that I think that especially someone who gets to go and watch gets, kind of like an open gym or like a basketball rec league tryout. I mean, you see these 300 guys down on the field, they're split into positions, so however many you have, and you just get to see the way they move, plain and simple. There's an eyeball test to that people don't really realize while they're going through certain drills that don't have a quantitative stat. That's one of my favorite parts of the combine. But as far as those drills go, could you break down what are the most important ones that we as fans should be watching closely? And I know that kind of changes from position to position, et cetera. But what are your favorites to watch every year? What gets you really, rowdy, gets you going when you're at the combine?
Well, the most important one to me in terms of just watching the numbers pile in is the 3-cone. I think the 3-cone is extremely vital, especially for pass rushers, especially for running backs. I mean, you could use the 3-cone in a lot of different positions. And I know a lot of people, got piled on DK Metcalf last year for his 4-3-cone. Now, that's a good example of not using the combine as your end-all, be-all. I actually had DK as my number one wide receiver last year. So that's a time where I bet on an outlier in terms of betting against the 3-cone because I knew DK could do a lot of things well that wouldn't impact his game in that certain instance. So the 3-cone to me is very, very vital more often than not. Now, in terms of watching, I really enjoy watching the 40 like anyone else because I like to see how fast people can run. I think that's a natural human reaction. And I'm really excited this year because we have a couple of guys that are going to absolutely fly. And there's a lot of different things. I really like seeing the wide receiver drills, just seeing how comfortable guys are going through those. You like seeing how the quarterbacks throw, although honestly, most of the time that, once again, it's more of an elimination game. Most quarterbacks are going to look good throwing at the combine. There's always a couple of guys that just look completely uncomfortable. And it makes you kind of wonder, hey, if they look uncomfortable here, how are they going to look on an NFL field or in an NFL training camp? So those are the really, really big ones for me. And I think it's just I don't care about how guys bench. Now, once again, I do think it's a test of your work ethic because bench is something that any human on this earth can improve at if they put in the work over time. So when you're going to the biggest job interview of your life, you'd like to see you at least compete in it or do well in it, not completely neglect it. I think that's kind of important. So there's a lot of things that make this a television event, but it'll always come back to the 40-yard dash. But when you're doing your actual draft research and looking for a number that sticks out to you, the 3-cone really matters to me. And of course, for wide receivers and defensive backs, I think how those guys jump also has a really big impact as well.
Another good segue there. You're a total pro because my next one was about the 40. And it feels like we get a guy every year that goes out and runs it and everyone just kind of looks at each other and goes, holy shit. I mean, who are some of the names that you think could maybe do that this year?
Well, I'm not going to surprise you with this one. I would take Henry Ruggs against the field. Right. I think Ruggs is going to go in the 4.2s. The question is how low can that 4.2 kind of get? Now, after talking to Jerry Jeudy, he told me that Ruggs with a bad start has gone 4.25. Now, what you have to realize is college clocks can be a little different. So I think that's something we need to take into account here. I think teams tend to time in favor of the players more often than not. Now, I still am a believer that Ruggs is going to be sub 4.3, which is just really off the charts, absolutely ridiculous, to be honest with you, when you get into that kind of territory. Jalen Reagor is another one that, I mean, the guy is just going to absolutely fly when he gets on the track. He's going to be probably low 4.3. So those two are really fun to me, especially when you have a guy like Ruggs that can challenge the record. I think that's something that everybody wants to see. Now, when you look at Salvin Ahmed from Washington, he's somebody who I actually got to see in person this year against USC, and right away, it's no secret this guy can fly. I think he's going to go around 4.38, maybe 4.37. I think that's a name nobody's talking about to run really well in the 40. So he's somebody I'm pretty excited to see go. And then you get into the players that aren't looking to break the record, aren't looking to go sub 4.3. They're going to surprise some people. Jonathan Taylor is going to run a 4.4. I mean, that's pretty explosive stuff at his size for
New Jersey 100-meter champion back-to-back years, if I'm not mistaken.
You're right, and it's crazy to me how people don't even think to look at that kind of stuff because I've seen people question his long speed, and it's like, what are we doing here? Jonathan Taylor is going to absolutely fly. You bring up the track background. I look at Ashton Davis from Cal. He's a guy that was actually tracked first and then walked on at Cal. So, and you watch him play, he has a track body and he moves like a track athlete at the deep safety spot as a free safety. So Davis is another guy that's going to be really fun to watch. And of course, you're looking for the household names. Like I want to see Jerry Jeudy run a sub 4.4, and I think he's going to do it. And I think people, for whatever reason, weren't expecting him to be that fast, but I think he's going to light it up as well. So this is a really fun group. And then one last guy that isn't necessarily going to light up the 40, but it's going to test ridiculously well for a 280-pounder. AJ Epinesa is he's really freaky in terms of what he can do. Yeah, he is. I've been not low on him, but just not getting overly excited when I see him in the top 15 of mock drafts. But I know Epinesa is freakish in terms of you got to take into account body weight and size. And his numbers for a guy that's going to come in at 280 plus are going to be very special.
Absolutely agree there. Ruggs has that, that factor that's going to bring a lot of attention to the 40, where when John Ross broke the record, not many people saw that coming. So it was kind of like a surprise, and all the eyes will be on Ruggs, a couple other guys there. Is there anyone specifically, would you say Epinesa just quickly, that you're looking that you think will significantly improve their stock?
Well, I always like to say it like this. I never want to be surprised at the combine, so I don't know how much it'll improve his stock, and maybe it'll surprise other people. I think the one for me that a lot of people are going to start shooting him up the board because they're going to go back and watch the film because you can't judge him from the box score, and that's Donovan Peoples-Jones. Peoples-Jones is a big wide receiver. He's someone that he's going to be probably 6'3". He's probably going to weigh 215, 220, and he could literally go 42 plus in the vert, and that's just absolutely ridiculous. I actually think Donovan Peoples-Jones could go 43 in the vert. I think he could do something stupid in the vert. He's going to run well. Like I said, you're going to look at him and you're going to get the vibes of you just love to see a big-bodied wide receiver that can physically dominate, especially at the deeper level of the field. And Shea Patterson never gave him the opportunity to do that. So people are going to go back to the film and be like, well, why did this guy have such underwhelming stats? And you're going to learn
because he chose Michigan.
It wasn't his fault. Yeah, for whatever reason, a 5-star recruit of that kind of magnitude.
He was supposed to be Julio coming out of high school.
Yeah, I know. The problem is a lot of guys get that reputation, but with DPJ, I actually think it was well earned. So I'm excited to see what he does there, and I think he'll be a second-round pick by the end of it.
Yeah, I remember watching him as, I think, a freshman on that All or Nothing show when they covered Michigan a couple years ago, and it's like this kid could be a third-rounder like right now. Which is crazy. So definitely seen some improved stock from him over the last couple of years, even playing, with Shea Patterson and all those guys. But moving on a little bit over to the offensive line, we're Ravens fans. Orlando Brown plays for the team we root for. So we understand a little bit how the combine can sometimes, what it can mean for an offensive lineman or what it can't mean. Like, how do you evaluate O-linemen at this event? And who are some of the guys that you think we should have our eyes on as potential risers because of it?
I think everybody, in terms of scouts across the league, look for body types at the combine. They want to see the arm length. They want to see, they have an idea in their head what they want a tackle to look like, and that's going to start with Mekhi Becton. He's not going to be, I don't think he'll be the first tackle off the board. Now, crazier things have happened, but with Becton, he's going to come in at 6'7", probably 360, and that's just ridiculous. I know he's working with Duke Manyweather, who's going to have him ready to go. Becton moves very well for that size, which is going to have people really fired up. So I look at Becton, and I think he's somebody that everyone's going to do the ooh and ah at looking at the lineman of how he measures in and just how he moves out there. And then the guys that I have ahead of him are probably not going to benefit from the combine in terms of their length. So, and I love Jedrick Wills, Tristan Wirfs, and Andrew Thomas, but they're a little bit more compact tackles. I think I've actually seen a lot of questions about Wirfs' ability to play tackle. A lot of people like him as a guard. I like him as a tackle. I'd give him a chance at least at first. I think he's a phenomenal player. I really love Tristan Wirfs. But Jedrick Wills is another guy that he's been built. He's really athletic, really, really athletic. I don't think he has your prototypical tackle body in terms of looking for these long kind of guys with pass protection. Josh Jones is that kind of guy from Houston. He's somebody like Becton that people are going to really like his measurements. But once again, this is a deep tackle class, and those guys are going to shine. And the offensive line, they're going to go to combine, and teams are just going to be wondering how high do we have to pick to even get one of these guys.
Absolutely. Switching over to the defensive side of the ball, is it the DBs who have, the most stock at the combine, the ones who are putting it in the most, or is there another position that you think has more?
I would say wide receiver, because unfortunately for wide receivers, you can almost run yourself out of the NFL, and it happens. I mean, a really good example last year is somebody that I really liked, and I know a lot of Twitter really liked, is Kelvin Harmon. And I think Kelvin Harmon was someone that super productive in college, had a lot of traits to excel as a wide receiver 2 or 3 at the next level. You see him, he's productive, good character. Really, there's a lot to like about this guy. He's strong, very, very strong. He wasn't super stiff for his size. I'm not saying he was flawless, but he goes and runs a 4.6, and he falls all the way to round 6, and deep in round 6. And you're sitting there and you're going, wow. I mean, that had to be the only reason, because he checked medicals, you check character, you go through the checklist with teams, and none of those problems came up. So they just didn't like him because he ran a 4.6, which once again, when I talked about a bad 40 time for a wide receiver to you guys, I didn't even say 4.6, I said 4.7. So if you're a wide receiver, you could unfortunately, and by the way, going back to that, Kelvin Harmon did not have a bad year for a 6th-round pick. He had a strong preseason.
Right.
Number one, he made the team as a 6th-round pick, and I think he was playing pretty good reps by the end of the year. I mean, the guy had 30 catches for 365 yards as a 6th-round pick on a team that could not throw the ball. So once again, the 40 matters, but don't completely write off guys. And Juwan Jennings from Tennessee is going to be that guy this year. He's going to run a 4. He honestly might go 4.7. It's scary, guys. It is. But I watched. I was 5 feet away from him in one-on-ones at the Senior Bowl the last day of this year, and he'll punch anyone in the mouth right across from him and catch the ball. He's one of the toughest players I've ever seen at the wide receiver position.
It's awesome. I always really enjoy like the hyper athletic freaks on the defensive side. Somebody like Byron Jones 5 years ago, maybe. Like, do you think there's any potential for any guys like that on defense this year?
That's a good question. I think Chase Young will test pretty well. Like I said, Epinesa is going to test really well. I want to see how Kinlaw does. So Patrick Queen and Kenneth Murray at the linebacker position, those guys should fly. They move incredibly well for linebackers. Like I said before, Ashton Davis is probably the big one. He's something else in terms of a track guy that's playing football. I mean, he really is. Ashton Davis would be the big one for me. I want to see what Jeff Okudah does. And Jeff Gladney, the corner from TCU, he's going to go. I think he goes in the 4.3s. I really do.
Gladney can fly.
Spencer's boy.
He's a little light, but he can fly, and he's a fighter in coverage. I mean, you go back and watch him against Denzel Mims this year, who's a lot bigger than him. He didn't really give up an inch against him. He'll fight all day. So
he blanketed Twitter's draft crush last year. Hakeem Butler absolutely blanked him.
Yeah, he did, and that was one of the games where I looked at it and said, I don't know if Butler can separate at the next level. And a lot of people like Butler as a first-round wide receiver, and that's one of the games you look at and you go, well, that's an NFL corner he's going against. And like you said, Gladney can absolutely run.
Right, and then jumping back into the quarterbacks, I feel like this event is the most important for them out of any position, really, for a multitude of reasons, specifically interviews. Is that something you'd agree with?
Oh, completely. I mean, you can interview yourself out of a job. It's like you can run yourself out of a job with the 40 at wide receiver. So teams value interviews as much as anyone. I mean, a good example last year is Ja'Kai Polite, who didn't even make the Jets after being a 3rd-round pick. Polite interviewed very, very poorly. He really struggled. It's just maturity. I don't think he was a bad person. I think it was just maturity. And that's a good example of someone that had first-round grades on film from teams. He did not test well. He did not come in top-tier shape. And most importantly, he did not interview well. So interviews really matter. They really, really do. You need to sell yourself like any other job that you fit in the locker room, especially with so many GMs across the league trying to build a specific culture in their organization.
Yeah, so interviews definitely seem to be the thing that people harp on as the most important for quarterbacks. As far as their drills go, with all the throwing and the stuff and the footwork, which drill would you say is maybe the most watched or considered by front offices as far as the QBs?
Well, I would say the first thing you brought up that's not a drill is the interviews. That's what matters the most. Now, in terms of, you really want to see just their drop back, their release. Now, those are things you should see all year when you're scouting. You really, unless a guy has serious flaws in his mechanics, whether it's his footwork, whether it's his release, his throwing motion, those are things that, you really should have a good read on already. Now, what he does in, indoors in shorts, is a little different. So I think that's something that if you're looking for anything, that's what matters. They want to see how the ball flies out of your hand. They want to see the juice on the ball. But if you're drafting a quarterback more often than not, you're probably flying out to see him in a private workout or bring him in or going to the pro day, sending out a squad to the pro day. So I think when you look at it from that perspective, I honestly, I don't want to say the combine doesn't matter for quarterbacks because it does. But what matters is the medicals, and you're going to see that with Tua, and the interviews. And, you're going to see that with, a guy like Jacob Eason. He's somebody that can honestly use a good interview process. Is he ready for the league after such a short stint in college and a lot of inconsistencies in decision-making? How is he going to do on the board? That's what matters so much in front of teams. And once again, those are things that you do not see on television.
Right. And expanding on the player team meetings a little bit for our audience who might not know, can you explain exactly what they are and what goes into them and, what to expect in that room?
Yeah, in terms of player interviews with teams?
Yes.
Yeah, so, the player's going to go meet with a team, and that could be at a conference room in the hotel, and they sit down, and there could be everyone in there, from your general manager to your head coach, if you want, to the defensive coordinator, offensive coordinator. Now, that position coach, your director of player personnel, if you have a vice president of player personnel, and director of college and area scouts, on and on and on. You could fill that bad boy up. So you could be sitting there, if it's me or you walking in, you could be sitting there in front of quite a large group of people. Now, certain teams will also do the opposite and exclude a lot of people, where you could be sitting there with 3 people. So, and everybody's got different energy. I've heard with Gruden, players actually really like meeting with Gruden. As much as he's tough on players, he's fun. They like his energy. And then you can I remember talking to Alec Ogletree last year. He did an event with us during draft week, and Ogletree told me that it was Joe Vitt, who was with the Saints at the time. He's now with the Jets. I think as a linebackers coach. He's actually Adam Gase's father-in-law, small world. But Vitt is somebody who's he looks like your everyday guy on the street. He's not an overly big guy, but he's an older guy. He said he was absolutely nuts. He'll scream at you. He'll yell at you. It's almost like a boot camp style. So you can get a lot of different things. And then, you could have somebody like Sean McVay, who's a little more calm. I think he's a little bit more, the word players coach gets thrown around a lot. That almost makes people sound like a softie. And I think it's more of just relating to the type of athlete that exists today. Guys, I'm 28, and I'll be honest with you, I've had bosses in the past that are in their 50s or whatever, and we just don't have a lot in common. And then I've had bosses in the past that are a couple of years older than me, and you see eye to eye on things. That's how it goes. Sean McVay's in his early 30s, so the players he's talking to, there's not some kind of generation gap that's astronomical. So a lot of people are different, and I actually side with the guys that try to relate to the players, because I think you'll figure out more about them rather than just breaking them down like a drill sergeant.
Yeah, definitely. And we have a ton of questions on these interviews because I'm just so fascinated by it. I think it's maybe the coolest part of the process, especially for the fact that we as fans really can't see much of them at all, if any. But I'm just kind of curious as for this year, for example, a guy like Jake Fromm has walking into that interview room, crushing it, and just completely rising his draft stock because of it. He's got that written all over him, and I think that's probably what's going to happen. What's one quarterback? You could pick him. You could, maybe pick another quarterback. You mentioned Eason there earlier, that you think has a chance to do that, where they go in there, they charm them in the interview, and they get on the whiteboard and they know their shit. Who do you think it would be?
It'll be Tua. Tua's going to go into the room, and everyone's going to have the same question. Where's he at with his health? Is it worth keeping an eye on this? And Tua's going to sit down, and everybody just loves Tua. It's one of Nick Saban's favorite players of all time. Think of all the great NFL players Nick Saban has coached. Tua is somebody that's going to come in. He's extremely bright. He's extremely polite. He's relatable. He takes command of the room when he needs to. The players loved him. The coaches loved him. Everybody at Alabama loved him. So when you look at Tua is a guy that at the end of the interview, they're going to go, hey, it's kind of like it's natural the way people react. You might look at it and as a coach and be like, hey, this guy's hip or whatever it is, the injury's piling up. It's just too much. We can't take the risk. And then after you walk out, he walks out and you go, man, I'm going to convince myself that he'll stay healthy. So it's That's how it goes when somebody can light up the room. Joe Burrow would have been one of those guys before this year. We thought Joe Burrow was going to be a third-round pick because we knew he'd interview really well. He's a really smart, likable kind of guy, and he's a great leader. And now Joe Burrow played himself into the number 1 overall pick. The rest of the stuff doesn't matter anymore. So Burrow would have been a good example a year ago. That's not the case anymore. He's the number 1 overall pick.
Yeah, suddenly he's Dion, and he can kind of run the interview if he wants.
Yeah, pretty much. He could say, why are you bringing me in? I know, that I remember Baker had that, I think, with the Bears one year. He's like, why I'm wasting my time here. So, which is not the best way to handle those, by the way. But, everyone's each their own. I think Herbert, people have a lot of questions with Herbert because he's a different kind of guy, but I think people will like Herbert. And I think the same could be said for Jordan Love. I think they're going to be likable kind of guys. So it's, Jake Fromm's a great one you brought up because Jake Fromm, you put him on the board and he's going to know everything that an NFL quarterback would know, which is just so rare. Where if Fromm interests me because you're going to sit there and go, well, hey, the intelligence factor will make up for the physical limitations. Now, that depends on your offense, and not every coach is going to sit there and say that, but I guarantee there'll be a handful in the league that do think that.
Dave Gettleman would love Jake Fromm.
He probably would. But I'll say this about Dave, though. He does like physically talented. Like Daniel Jones has a lot of physical talent.
That's true.
Fromm is a day 3 physical talent.
He's a professional quarterback.
Top 10 brain. So you look at it, and Fromm's tough, man. But I think somebody will take him on day 2 just for how well he interviews alone.
Right. And finally, we've got to know, because we haven't been, Indianapolis as a city, 1 to 10 straight score. Give it to us. Rate it.
Oh, man. I mean, not to be that guy. I've been a lot of places this year. I don't mind Indy. I guess
that'll be their new slogan.
I've heard
Indy,
it's.
We don't mind it.
I've heard it's underrated. Like walking everywhere, you've got the nice restaurants.
So I don't like to rate cities as a whole because you could find good and bad about every place you've been to. Also, I'll rate the downtown because that's where I spend the most time. It's a solid 7.5 because there's some really good places to eat. It's very central, which I like when I'm working because I hate jumping in a car to drive 8 million directions in traffic. So for a working city, and that's all I do in Indy, and it's so easy to get to, especially from Newark, there's like 9 million direct flights a day. I like Indy. I mean, now it's going to be freaking cold in February, but I live in New York, so whatever. It is what it is. And I go a lot of strange places, guys, and Indy is not near the bottom of the list. It is completely fine and adequate, and has some sneaky good places to eat.
Yeah, I've heard some good things, so I just wanted to know. But the fact that you can see the good in places is a good thing. We should get you down to Baltimore sometime.
Yeah, you have to, man. You have to. And yeah, Baltimore is actually one of the weird places on this coast that I have not been to yet, but
it's weird.
Eventually.
Yeah, there's not much reason to get down here, but hopefully the Ravens can keep the good run up, and maybe you'll have a couple games that you'd have to attend as media. But either way, man, we really appreciate your time. We know you got to get running here, but you gave some great insight, crushed it as always, and really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem, guys. I appreciate you having me on, all right?
Yep, have a good one, buddy.
Absolutely. Enjoy Elmo's Steakhouse, my friend.
All right, I definitely will. Later, guys.
Later.
All right, thanks a lot. Appreciate you guys. See you later. All right, God bless.
Hell yeah.